The call came in at 11:47 p.m. I'd been lying awake for an hour already, staring at the ceiling, waiting for nothing I could name. The bedroom was dark. David's side of the bed was empty. He was in Dubai, had been for 2 weeks, due back Thursday. The kitchen light was still on downstairs. I'd forgotten to turn it off after dinner. My phone lit up on the nightstand. International number. Long prefix I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I don't know why I answered. I just did. The woman on the other end spoke carefully, measured, like she'd already rehearsed what she was about to say. She told me her name was Fatima. There had been an accident, a car accident, on a highway outside Dubai. My husband was in hospital, stable, recovering. I sat up, pushed the duvet back, said, "Thank you for calling. I'm his wife. I'll book a flight tonight." There was a pause. 3 seconds, maybe. She said, "I'm his wife. I'm listed as his emergency contact." I thought she had the wrong number, the wrong man. I said, "That's not possible. I'm his wife. We've been married for 7 years." Another pause, then, "I know. That's what the other one said too." I walked downstairs. The kitchen light was still on, exactly as I'd left it. I sat down on the floor with my back against the cabinet under the sink. The tiles were cold through my socks. There was a mug on the counter from that morning, still half full of tea I hadn't finished. His coffee cup was in the drying rack. I'd washed it before bed out of habit. The room was exactly as I'd left it. Dish towel folded over the oven handle. The fruit bowl. His spare keys on the hook by the back door, the ones he never took when he traveled. Everything in its place, in the room we had chosen together, in the house we had renovated together. I sat on the floor and looked at all of it. I called his number. It rang out. I called again. Voicemail. I called the hospital number Fatima had given me. A nurse confirmed he was there, stable, recovering. Emergency contact. Fatima al-Rashidi, his wife. I put the phone face down on the tiles. The other one, not another woman, not someone else. The other one, like it was a known quantity. Like there was already a list, and I was on it, and she already knew where. I sat with that for a long time. By 3 a.m., I had convinced myself there was an explanation. A misunderstanding. An ex who had never let go. Something complicated and fixable, and not what it sounded like. I told myself that for hours, but I kept coming back to the way she said it. Not cruel, not dramatic, just tired. Like she had already been through the shock I was still standing in, and come out the other side, and was now simply reporting what she knew. A fox was sitting in the middle of the road under the streetlight when I got up to stand at the window. Completely still. Then it walked away. I stood there until the sky started to go gray. I didn't sleep. I didn't book a flight. I sat at the kitchen table and waited, because waiting was the only thing I could do that didn't require me to know what came next. I didn't understand yet that the other one wasn't the worst part of what she'd said. The worst part was, too. I need to tell you who I was before that phone call. Not because I want your sympathy, because the story doesn't make sense without it. I grew up in South London. My mother, Pauline, worked nights for most of my childhood. She was a nurse, still is technically, though she's mostly retired now. I learned early how to be quiet in the mornings, how to make my own breakfast, how to not need things at inconvenient times. It made me self-sufficient in ways I've always been grateful for. It also made me the kind of person who notices when someone gives something without being asked. I went into financial services after university. Compliance. Which means I spend my professional life looking for things that don't add up. Discrepancies. Patterns that shouldn't be there. I'm good at it. I met David at a conference when I was 31. He was presenting on international trade logistics. I was there for a panel on cross-border financial regulation. He was composed in a way that felt unusual, not performing confidence, not working the room, just present. He asked a question during the Q&A that was genuinely sharp. I noticed that. He asked for my card at the end of the day. He called 3 days later, not 2, not 1, 3. I noticed that too. We dated for 18 months before he proposed. Neither of us was in a rush. We had dinner. We traveled. We argued about small things and resolved them without drama. He was reliable in the specific way I had always needed someone to be. He called when he said he would call. He showed up when he said he would show up. He remembered things. Not just birthdays. The small things. The name of the manager who was making my life difficult that quarter. The restaurant I'd mentioned once wanting to try. The way I took my coffee. My mother liked him. She said he was quote for coming from Pauline. That was the highest possible endorsement. We got married when I was 33. Small wedding. 40 people. Exactly what we both wanted. We bought a Victorian terrace in Peckham and spent 2 years renovating it on weekends. Choosing tiles, arguing about paint colors, making decisions together about what kind of home we wanted to live in. I loved that process more than I expected to. Not because of the house, exactly. Because of the way we made decisions together. Slowly, without drama, with both of us actually caring about the outcome. He'd hold up 2 paint swatches on a Saturday morning, still in his coat from the hardware shop, and actually wait for my answer. We argued about the kitchen floor for 3 weeks. I still think I was right. He traveled for work. International consulting, trade logistics, supply chain advisory, clients across the Gulf and Southeast Asia. Away 3 weeks out of every 4 sometimes. I had my own career, my own rhythm. I didn't need him present every day. I needed him to be who he said he was, and when he came home the same way every time. Keys on the hook, bag at the bottom of the stairs, asking what I wanted for dinner before he'd even taken his jacket off. It felt steady. It felt like something I could rely on. There was one grief. We had tried for a baby in years 3 and 4 of the marriage. It hadn't worked. We had one pregnancy that ended at 11 weeks. I fell apart in a way I hadn't prepared for. Not just the loss itself, but the specific silence afterward, the way the house felt for a few weeks. The way I kept doing ordinary things and being surprised that they still needed doing. David was there, present and gentle. He said the right things. He held me while I cried. We tried again for a while after that. Then we stopped, without ever formally deciding to stop. I told myself I had made peace with it. I had built a life I was proud of, with a man I trusted completely, and I had decided that was enough. Most days, I believed that. I used to say, when people asked about my marriage, which wasn't often because I'm private about those things, I used to say, I'm not in love with a fantasy. I know exactly who I married. I said it like it was a fact. The Sunday mornings, the renovation weekends, the arguments about paint colors that somehow never turned into real arguments. The way the house had started to feel like ours rather than just mine. I had built something real. I was sure of that. I just didn't know yet that the man who remembered how I took my coffee had a different name. I've gone back over the years many times since that night, looking for the moment I should have stopped. The moment I should have looked harder, asked a different question, not let something go. There are 3 I keep coming back to. The first was a Sunday afternoon, about 2 years into the marriage. My mother called. She wanted to thank David for a birthday gift he'd sent her. A book she'd mentioned once wanting, months earlier. He had remembered and ordered it without being asked, which was exactly the kind of thing he did. He was in the next room. I called to him. He came to the doorway, looked at the phone in my hand, and said he was just stepping out. He'd call her back later. He never did. I mentioned it once, a few days afterward. He apologized, said he'd forgotten. I let it go because it was a small thing, and because the gift itself had been so thoughtful that the missed call felt like a minor footnote. I filed it and moved on. I've thought about that doorway a lot since then, the way he looked at the phone before he said anything. Not at me, at the phone. The second was at a dinner party, maybe 3 years in. A colleague of mine asked David where he grew up. He said Lagos, then London from the age of 12. Specific. Easy. The kind of thing you say when you've said it many times before. 6 months later, at another dinner, someone asked the same question. He said, Abuja, London from the age of 10. I heard it. I registered the difference. I told myself I must have misremembered the first answer. People simplify their histories for different audiences, round numbers up or down, compress things for the sake of a dinner table conversation. I know I do. But I remembered it. Both versions. I just didn't do anything with it. That's the part I've had to sit with. Not that I missed it, that I noticed it, held it, and then quietly put it down. The third was his passport. We were in Lisbon for our first anniversary. At the check-in desk, he handed both our passports across the counter, and I glanced at his while the agent was processing them. The photo was him. The name was right. But something about the document felt slightly off. I couldn't have said exactly what. The texture of it, maybe. The way the laminate sat. Something that didn't quite match the weight of what I expected a passport to feel like. I handed it back and didn't think about it again. Or I thought I didn't. The mind stores things without asking permission. That small, unnameable wrongness sat somewhere I couldn't access. Until the night of the phone call, when it came back immediately, fully formed, like it had been waiting the whole time. I'm not a careless person. I spend my working life looking for exactly these kinds of inconsistencies. But there is a difference between looking at a stranger's file and looking at your husband's face. When you love someone, when you have built a life with them deliberately and carefully, the part of your brain that looks for problems goes quiet. Not because you're foolish, because you trust. The 3 moments, the phone call he never returned, the city that changed, the passport that felt wrong, none of them were enough on their own. Each one had a reasonable explanation. Each one was easier to dismiss than to pursue. But I had dismissed them. And some part of me had kept them anyway, stored somewhere I didn't check, in a file I hadn't opened. Until I had to. The year before, the phone call was different. I didn't have a name for it at the time. I just knew something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in any way I could point to and say there, that's it. Just a low, persistent wrongness that I kept explaining away because I was good at explaining things away, and because I had a lot of other things to explain. David was traveling more than usual, 3 weeks out of 4, sometimes longer. He said it was a major contract in the Gulf, a logistics overhaul for a regional port authority, significant scope, the kind of project that required sustained presence on the ground. It was plausible. It was exactly the kind of work he did. I had no reason to question it. I told myself I didn't mind. I had my own work, my own rhythm. I was used to the empty side of the bed, but the house felt different that year. Quieter in a way that had started to feel less like solitude and more like absence. He changed the password on his laptop sometime in the spring. He mentioned it in passing. A work security requirement. New IT policy. Something like that. He said it the way you'd say you'd switched to a different brand of coffee. I didn't ask why. I told myself it was nothing. A few weeks later, a courier came to the door with a package addressed to a name I didn't recognize. Not David's name, not mine. Someone else entirely. I was still reading the label when David appeared behind me. I hadn't heard him come downstairs, and took it from my hands. He said a client had used our address by mistake. He'd sort it out. He took the package, and I never saw it again. I stood in the hallway for a moment after he'd gone. The front door was still open. I remember the cold coming in. Then I went back to what I was doing. The receipt was in his jacket pocket. I found it in October, going through his coat before dropping it at the dry cleaner. A jeweler. Not the one he'd used for my engagement ring. A different shop entirely. In a city he hadn't mentioned visiting. I looked at it for a moment. Then I asked him about it that evening. He said it was a gift for a client's wife, a thank you for hosting a dinner. He said it without hesitation, with just enough detail to be convincing. The client's name, the occasion, the city. He said it the way he said everything, calmly, specifically, without any visible discomfort. I put the receipt down and said something like, "Oh, that's thoughtful of you." I believed him. I chose to believe him. Around this time, my mother asked me, unprompted, during one of our Sunday calls, whether everything was all right with David. I said yes. Everything was fine. Work was busy. He was traveling a lot. But that was nothing new. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "A man who hides his family is hiding himself." I laughed. I told her she was being protective, that everything was fine, that David was just busy. She didn't push it. She moved on to something else, and so did I. But I thought about it afterward, in the way you think about something you've decided not to think about. It kept surfacing. I kept pushing it back down. I wasn't sleeping well. Waking at 3 or 4 a.m., lying in the dark with my mind already running, shoulders tight, like I'd been braced for something in my sleep. I told myself it was work, a difficult quarter, a team restructure, a senior review. There were real reasons to be tired. I used them, but I knew the difference between that kind of tired and this kind. I just didn't want to know what this kind meant. I stayed on the kitchen floor for a long time. At some point I moved to the table. I don't remember deciding to. I just found myself sitting there, both hands around a cup of coffee I'd made and not drunk. The overhead light too bright for that hour. Outside, the street was dark and quiet. The fox was gone. Everything was exactly as it had been before the call, which was the part I couldn't stop noticing, that the room had no idea what had just happened in it. I called David 7 times between midnight and 2 a.m. Each time it rang out. Each time I sat and listened to his voicemail, his voice, calm and familiar, asking me to leave a message, and hung up without speaking. I called the hospital again. A different nurse this time, but the same answer. Stable. Recovering. Emergency contact, Fatima al-Rashidi. I asked if there was another contact listed. She checked. There wasn't. I put the phone down on the table and looked at it. By 2 a.m., I had started building smaller explanations. Not because I believed them, because the full version, the version where Fatima was telling the truth, where the other one meant what it sounded like, was too large to hold in a kitchen at 2 a.m. without breaking something. So I built smaller ones instead. An ex-wife, never properly divorced on paper. A cultural arrangement I hadn't understood. A legal complication from before we met that he hadn't known how to explain. I lined them up and examined them and found ways to make each one just about plausible. I did this until the sky went light. By 4 a.m., I had settled on the version I could survive until morning, that there was an explanation, that David would give it to me, and that it would be something I could absorb without the last 7 years becoming unrecognizable. I held on to that version with both hands. He called at 7:23 a.m. I picked up before the second ring. His voice was calm, familiar, slightly tired in the way it always was after a difficult night. Measured, careful, the voice he used when he was managing something. I had heard that voice in boardrooms and at hospital bedsides and in the quiet aftermath of our miscarriage. I knew it completely. He said, Quote 7. I didn't say anything. I waited. He said he could explain. He said Fatima was someone from his past, a relationship from years before we met, in a different country, under different circumstances. He said it had never been properly resolved. Legal complications, family pressure, a situation that had become complicated in ways he hadn't known how to bring to me. He said he had handled it badly. He said he had been trying to resolve it quietly, without putting it on me, and that he had been wrong to do that. He said he should have told me. He said he was sorry. He said, Quote 8. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to all of it. What I have never been able to explain to anyone who heard this story later is that it wasn't the words that made me hold on. It was his voice. The same register, the same steadiness. 7 years of that voice telling me the truth. That's what I was hearing. Not just the explanation, all of it, underneath. I asked him one question. I asked him if it was over, if Fatima was in the past, if there was nothing current, nothing I didn't know about. He said, Yes, I promise you, there is nothing else. I believed him enough. Not cleanly, not completely, but enough to stay on the phone. Enough to say I needed a few days. Enough to not book a flight to Dubai and walk into that hospital and stand in front of both of them. The full version of the truth would have taken everything at once. The smaller version let me stay standing. That's the one I chose. There is a particular kind of grief that comes not from losing something, but from finding out it was never what you thought it was. I don't have a clean word for it. I just have the memories, and what they mean now. Lisbon. We went for our first anniversary. 3 days. A small hotel in Alfama, terracotta rooftops, the kind of light that makes everything look like it was designed to be photographed. We walked everywhere. We ate late. We argued mildly about whether to take a day trip and decided against it, and were both glad. I remember thinking, this is what I wanted. This is exactly it. I remember the passport at the check-in desk. The one that felt slightly wrong. I handed it back and didn't think about it again. Now I think about him at that dinner table, pouring wine, asking what I wanted to do the next day. Entirely present, entirely elsewhere at the same time. I don't know what he was carrying into that trip. I don't know what he knew that I didn't. I just know that the memory I kept for 7 years as one of the best of my life now has something underneath it that I can't unfeel. The miscarriage. I was 11 weeks. We had told almost no one. I started bleeding on a Tuesday morning, and by the evening it was over. David was home. He held me while I cried. He said the right things. Not too much, not too little. He made calls, handled the practical things, sat with me in the hospital waiting room with his hand over mine. In the weeks afterward, he was gentle and careful with me in a way I had never needed before and have never forgotten. I don't doubt that it was real. That's the part that undoes me. I think he was genuinely there, genuinely present, genuinely trying to hold me together. And at the same time, somewhere else, there was another life. Another woman, maybe more than one. Another version of him that existed alongside the one sitting beside me in that waiting room. I've stopped trying to work out which one was the real him. I'm not sure the question has a clean answer. Christmas. The year he said he was in Singapore. A client emergency, unavoidable. He was sorry. I spent Christmas with my mother and told her work had kept him. She made jollof rice. We watched old films. It was a good day. I sat at her table and talked about my husband and believed everything I was saying. I don't know where he actually was. I have a guess now. But what stays with me isn't the lie itself. It's the memory of being completely certain. Of defending him, in my own head, to no one. Of not having a single doubt. That certainty is what I grieve, almost as much as anything else. The house. 2 years of weekends. Paint swatches and tile samples and arguments about whether the kitchen needed an island. The Saturday, he drove 40 minutes to a reclamation yard because I'd seen a particular kind of Victorian floor tile online and wanted to look at them in person. He spent 3 hours there with me. He carried the samples to the car without complaining. We made that house together. That's what I believed. Then I found out about the second mortgage, a charge on the property taken out 18 months before the phone call, without my knowledge, without my signature. I still don't fully understand how it was done. What I understand is that while I was living in that house, sleeping in it, making decisions about it, he had already borrowed against it. The house we had chosen together. The house I thought was ours. The care was real. The 40-minute drive was real. The 3 hours at the reclamation yard were real. And underneath all of it, he had already started to take it apart. David didn't come home on Thursday. He called that afternoon and said the project had extended. Another week, maybe 10 days. He was sorry. He'd make it up to me. His voice was the same as it always was. Calm, specific, slightly tired. I said fine. I said I understood. I hung up and sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. I had been waiting for him to come home so I could look at his face when he explained, so I could watch his eyes while he talked. I had been holding myself together for 4 days on the basis that when he walked through the door, I would know. I would be able to tell. Now there was no door. Just the phone. And his voice. And another week of waiting. Fatima's email arrived on the 4th day. No subject line, just attachments, and 3 sentences. I think we need to see the same things. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I just think you deserve to know what's real. There were 3 attachments. I opened the first one. A marriage certificate. Her name, his name, a date 11 years ago. An official document, stamped and witnessed, entirely legible. I read it twice. I read it a third time. I looked at his name and her name side by side, and I made myself understand what I was looking at. Then I opened the second one, a wedding photograph. David in a dark suit. Younger, lighter somehow, standing beside a woman in ivory, smiling, not performing a smile, actually smiling, the way he smiled at me in the Lisbon photographs, the way he smiled in every photograph I had of him. The same man, the same smile, a different woman, a different life. I closed the laptop. I sat for a while. I don't know how long. Then I opened it again and opened the third attachment. A hospital photograph. Fatima in a bed, exhausted and luminous the way women are in those photographs. David beside her, holding a newborn. The baby's face was turned toward the camera. David was looking at the baby, not the camera, with an expression I recognized. The same quality of attention he gave to things he genuinely cared about. I closed the laptop again. This time, I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran the cold tap and put my wrists under it. I don't know why. It's what I do when I need to come back to my body. I stood there for a few minutes. Then I dried my hands and went back to the laptop and called Fatima. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was the same as it had been on the night of the accident. Careful, measured, already on the other side of something. She was a structural engineer, she told me, based in Dubai. They had a daughter who was 9 years old. She had suspected something was wrong for about 2 years, but the suspicions had been formless. Absences that didn't quite add up. Explanations that were always just plausible enough. It was the accident that broke it open. His phone, unlocked on the hospital tray while he was in surgery. She had picked it up to call his family. That was when she found the contacts. My number was labeled home. She said it quietly, without emphasis. Just a fact. I heard it and didn't say anything for a moment. 7 years of marriage, A Victorian terrace in Peckham, 2 years of renovation weekends. All of it. One word in a contact list. Fatima said there was another contact. A woman named Priya. She had called her the day before. Priya had not believed her at first. Fatima asked if I would be willing to call her with her together, so that Priya could hear it from both of us. I said yes. Priya was 34. A pharmacist. She lived in Toronto. She had been married to him for 3 years under a name I didn't recognize. A different surname. A different version of the same man. She was pregnant. Fatima told her gently, and I heard the silence on the other end of the line. The specific quality of it. The way it stretched and didn't break. The way Priya was doing exactly what I had done 4 days earlier in a kitchen at midnight. Trying to find the version of this that made sense. None of us had one anymore. The three of us stayed on the phone for a long time. We didn't make plans. We didn't talk about what to do next. We just stayed. 3 women in 3 different cities, connected by a man who had given each of us a different version of himself and a different version of a life, and who is currently in a hospital in Dubai, stable and recovering, with none of our names on his door. At some point, Priya said, "How does someone do this?" Not a question, exactly. Just a thing that needed to be said out loud. Neither of us answered. There was just the line, open, the 3 of us breathing, the silence doing the work that words couldn't. We said goodnight eventually. Carefully, the way you speak to people you have just been through something with and don't yet have a language for. I put the phone down and sat in the quiet. His spare keys were still on the hook by the back door. The kitchen light was still on. He had another daughter. He had a pregnant wife. He had my number saved as home. I had thought the worst part was the other one. I hadn't even been close. David stopped calling on the 5th day. First his phone went to voicemail. Then it rang once and cut off. Then it stopped ringing entirely. Just a flat, immediate silence when I dialed. The kind that means the number has been changed or the phone has been switched off for good. I tried 3 times over 2 days. Then I stopped trying. I went to work. I opened a new document on my personal laptop on a Tuesday evening, and I started a file. Not because I had decided to, because it was the only thing I knew how to do with what I was feeling. I needed somewhere to put it. I needed it to have a structure. I spend my professional life looking at financial arrangements that were designed to look legitimate and finding the places where they weren't. I know what a clean paper trail looks like. I know what it looks like when someone has worked hard to make it appear clean. I started with what I knew, what I could verify, what needed checking. The joint financial records came first. I had access to most of them. We had a joint account for household expenses, a joint savings account, shared utility bills. I went through 18 months of statements in a single evening, line by line. Most of it was ordinary. Then I found the payments. Recurring transfers every 6 to 8 weeks. Amounts between £3,000 and £8,000, labeled as consultancy fees. Paid to a company I didn't recognize. I ran the company name. Registered in the British Virgin Islands. Incorporated 4 years ago. No public-facing website. No listed directors I could find through standard searches. A shell, or something close enough to one that the difference didn't matter. I called a forensic accountant I knew professionally, someone I had worked with on a fraud case 2 years earlier. I told him I had a personal matter. He didn't ask questions. He said he'd look at what I sent him. The mortgage came next. I had known about the second charge on the property since Fatima's email, but I hadn't looked at the paperwork directly. I requested it through the land registry. It arrived 3 days later. I opened it at the kitchen table. The document was real. The charge was real. The amount was significant. Enough to matter. Enough to do damage. And there, on the signature line, was my name. I looked at the signature for a long time. It was close. Someone had practiced it. The general shape was right. The G, the curve of the letters. But I have a specific way of signing my name that I've had since university, a small idiosyncrasy in the way I close the last letter. It wasn't there. It wasn't my signature. I sat with that for a moment. Not the fraud itself. I had already understood, intellectually, that something like this was possible. It was the specific fact of someone sitting somewhere and practicing my name, rehearsing it, getting it almost right. I called a solicitor the next morning. Fatima had been doing the same thing in Dubai. She had found business accounts tied to his residency there, accounts I hadn't known existed, registered under a variation of his name. The same shell company appeared in the records, and on one of the incorporation documents, listed as a secondary director, was a name neither of us recognized. Chisom. Fatima sent me the document. I looked at the name for a long time. She was there, in the paperwork, connected to the same structure. I added her name to the file. Priya found her own damage 3 days later. She had been going through her finances the same way we had, methodically, carefully, looking for the places that didn't add up. She found them in her joint savings account. Transfers going back 14 months, labeled as investment contributions, moving money into an account she had never seen before. When she added it up, it came to just over $67,000. She called us that evening. Her voice was steady in the way that voices are when someone has already done their crying and moved into something harder. She said the number out loud and then she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, quote 11. We built a shared document that week. The three of us, in different time zones, adding to it at different hours. Fatima at night in Dubai. Priya in the early mornings in Toronto. Me in the evenings in London, at the kitchen table with the overhead light on. Bank records, company registrations, property documents, dates that overlapped, names that recurred. A structure built carefully, over years, across multiple jurisdictions, by someone who understood exactly how to make things difficult to trace. I had spent 15 years learning to read structures like this. I had just never expected to find myself inside one. The forensic accountant came back to me on a Thursday morning. He sent a summary document and then called to walk me through it. His voice had the careful, neutral quality of someone delivering information they know will cause damage. He said the shell company in the British Virgin Islands was connected to 2 other entities, one registered in Cyprus, one in Hong Kong. The money moved between them in a pattern he described as deliberate and practiced. Not the work of someone improvising, the work of someone who had done this before and knew exactly where the friction points were. He said, quote 12. I asked him about Chisom. She wasn't a peripheral name. She was on the original incorporation documents for the Cyprus entity, not as a nominee, not as a formality. An active director for at least 6 years. I wrote that down. I sat with it for a moment. Then I called the private investigator. I had found him through my solicitor. Former police, financial crime background, worked mostly on fraud cases. I gave him everything we had. The company names, the dates, the variations of David's name across different documents. I told him I needed to know who I had actually married. He came back to me in 11 days. His name was not David Osei. His name was Emeka Nwosu. He was 47 years old, 9 years older than he had told me. He had a mother named Adeize and a sister named Chisom, both based in Lagos. He had a real passport in his real name, issued in Nigeria, that none of us had ever seen. The passport I had glimpsed in Lisbon, the one that had felt slightly wrong, that had been a different document entirely. I read the investigator's report 3 times. I kept stopping at the name, Emeka Nwosu. I said it out loud once, quietly, in the kitchen. It didn't connect to anything. It didn't connect to the man who had argued with me about kitchen floors or driven 40 minutes to a reclamation yard or held me in a hospital waiting room. It was a stranger's name, which was, I understood, exactly the point. There had been others before us. The investigator had found two. A woman in Warsaw, married to him under a different name, 6 years before me. A woman in Bucharest, 2 years after Warsaw, 3 years before Fatima. Both had followed the same pattern: a careful courtship, a marriage, financial access, and then a disappearance. Clean, practiced, leaving just enough legal ambiguity to make pursuit difficult. The woman in Warsaw was still repaying a debt she hadn't known she'd taken on until he was gone. The woman in Bucharest had lost her apartment. I read those 2 paragraphs and had to put the report down. Not because the information was surprising, exactly. By that point, I had already understood that this was a structure, not an accident. But there is a difference between understanding something intellectually and reading the specific details of a specific woman's life, being taken apart by the same hands that had held yours. The scheme was at least 15 years old. 15 years. Which meant that when he had stood at the end of an aisle and said whatever he had said to Fatima, he had already done this at least once before. When he had asked for my card at a conference and called 3 days later, not 2, not 1, 3. He had already done it twice. Adaze had been receiving regular transfers from the shell company for years. Not large amounts. Careful amounts. The kind that don't attract attention. Consistent. Monthly. Chisholm had been a director of the Cyprus entity since its incorporation. His mother and his sister. The 2 people he had told each of us were dead. I called Fatima first. I read her the name, Emeka Nwosu, and there was a silence on the line. Then she said, quote 13. I said, quote 14. We called Priya together. Priya said, underscore, quote, underscore 15, underscore, underscore. None of us spoke for a moment. I had spent weeks trying to hold on to the idea that some part of what we had was real. That even if the man wasn't who he said he was, the years had meant something. That I had been chosen for a reason. That it wasn't entirely performance. The report took that away too. I wasn't the exception. I was the latest version of something that had been running for 15 years, refined across countries and women, each one carefully selected and carefully left. He had practiced my signature. He had practiced all of it. The private investigator found Marta in Gdansk. He made contact carefully, through an intermediary, and explained what he was working on. She took 4 days to respond. When she did, she said she would speak to me directly, but only on a video call, and only once. We arranged it for a Wednesday evening. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and waited for her face to appear on the screen. She was in her early 40s, quiet, composed, with the particular stillness of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and learned to carry it without showing it. She had been married to him when she was 26. She had spent the years since managing the financial damage he left behind, a debt she hadn't known existed until he was gone, a credit history that had taken years to rebuild, a life that had been quietly dismantled and then handed back to her in pieces. She told me all of this without drama, just facts, in careful English, looking directly at the camera. Then she told me about the letter. About a year after he disappeared, when Marta had started asking questions, contacting lawyers, trying to trace where the money had gone, she received a handwritten letter in the post. No return address. The sender identified herself only as his mother. The letter told her to stop looking. It didn't threaten her directly. It was more careful than that. It mentioned her family, her parents, her younger brother, specific details that made clear the writer knew who they were and where they lived. It said that continuing to pursue the matter would be unwise. It said some things were better left alone. Marta had kept the letter. She photographed it and sent it to me that evening. I opened the image and looked at it for a long time. The handwriting was not the handwriting of someone in distress or anger. It was careful, controlled, evenly spaced, consistent pressure, the kind of script that takes time. It read like something that had been drafted before it was written. Administrative, almost. The way you'd write a formal notice, not a warning. I thought about a days receiving monthly transfers from a shell company for years. I had read those transactions as financial, a son sending money home, or a mother being paid for her silence. I understood now that I had been reading it wrong. She wasn't being paid for her silence. She was helping to maintain everyone else's. I went back through the financial records with that in mind. The transfers to Adays were consistent and long-running, going back further than I had initially traced, further than the scheme's involvement with any of us. Chisholm had been a director of the Cyprus entity since its incorporation. Not a passive name on a document. An active participant in the structure that moved the money, obscured the trail, and kept the operation running across jurisdictions and years. This was not a man who had built something alone and hidden it from his family. This was a family that had built something together. I sat with that for a long time. The difference matters. A man acting alone is a betrayal. A family acting together is something else. A system with more moving parts, more protection, more deliberate architecture. It meant that every time I had been in a room with David and felt certain of him, there were other people, elsewhere, making sure that certainty held. My solicitor called me on a Friday afternoon. She said she had found something in the financial documents that she needed to walk me through carefully. Her voice had the same quality as the forensic accountant's. Neutral, precise, the register of someone managing the delivery of something difficult. She told me about the life insurance policy. It had been taken out 18 months before the phone call. On my life. David was the sole beneficiary. The policy was substantial, the kind of amount that requires medical underwriting, that requires someone to have thought carefully about the paperwork. I asked her to send me the document. I read it twice. Then I read it again. I put the phone down and sat in the kitchen and looked at the wall. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't need to. The implication was already there, cold and specific, sitting in the room with me. 18 months ago, while I was sleeping badly and explaining it away as work stress, while I was finding receipts in jacket pockets and choosing to believe him, someone had been calculating what I was worth if I was gone. I don't know what he was planning. I may never know. But I know what the document said, and I know when it was taken out, and I know that the man who took it out had already done this to at least 4 other women and had a family structure in place to protect him when things needed to be managed. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called my mother. Pauline picked up on the second ring, the way she always does. I told her everything. Not in the careful, managed way I had been telling things to solicitors and investigators. All of it, from the beginning. The phone call at 11:47 p.m. Fatima. Priya. The name Emeka Nwosu. The forged signature. Marta's letter. The life insurance policy. She listened without interrupting. My mother has always known how to be quiet when quiet is what's needed. She didn't gasp or exclaim. She just listened, steadily, the way she used to sit with patients through difficult nights. When I finished, there was a short silence. Then she said, quote 16. I had laughed when she said it the first time. I had told her she was being protective, that everything was fine, that David was just busy. I said, quote 17. She didn't say anything else for a moment. Neither did I. We just stayed on the line together, in the quiet, while the kitchen light stayed on and the spare keys hung on the hook by the back door, and the house that was no longer entirely mine sat around me in the dark. It took 6 weeks to build the package. 6 weeks of evenings and weekends, of documents translated and certified, of legal teams in 3 countries coordinating across time zones, of Fatima sending files at midnight and Priya responding before dawn, and me sitting at the kitchen table in London going through everything one more time to make sure nothing was missing and nothing could be challenged. Each of us retained legal help in our own jurisdiction. A solicitor in London, a lawyer in Dubai who specialized in financial fraud, a firm in Toronto that Priya found through a women's legal advocacy organization. We didn't know each other's lawyers. We didn't need to. We had the shared document, and we had each other, and we had learned by then how to work. The package, when it was finished, contained everything. Financial records going back years, identity documents in multiple names, the investigator's full findings, Marta's written testimony, which she gave formally and without hesitation, and the handwritten letter from a woman who had identified herself only as his mother, photographed and certified and included as evidence of what the scheme had required to survive. We filed simultaneously, London, Dubai, Toronto, the same morning, within the same hour. Interpol was contacted through the appropriate channels. I won't pretend I understood all of it. That part belonged to the lawyers. What I understood was the outcome. A red notice issued for Emeka Nwosu and the aliases he had used across multiple countries and multiple marriages. He was located in Cape Town. He was with another woman, younger. The investigator's contact sent a brief description, a professional woman, recently met, early in what she believed was a relationship with a man she knew by a name none of us recognized. I read that and sat with it for a moment. Then I called the journalist. I had known her professionally for several years, an investigative reporter who covered financial crime and fraud. I trusted her to be careful. I told her I had a story, and I had one condition before I would give her anything. The woman in Cape Town had to be warned before a single word was published. She didn't hesitate. She said yes. I don't know exactly how it was done. I know it was done. I know that before the story ran, someone reached that woman and told her who she was sitting across from at dinner, who had been asking her questions and learning her life and building towards something she couldn't yet see. I know she believed it, because she cooperated with the authorities afterward and gave a full statement. I think about her sometimes. The specific moment of that phone call. The version of her that existed just before it, and the version that existed just after. I know what that feels like. The story ran on a Sunday morning. I was at my mother's house. I hadn't planned it that way. I had gone the night before and stayed, and in the morning Pauline made tea and we sat at her kitchen table and I opened my laptop and read the piece alongside her. It was careful and thorough, and it named everything. 3 wives, 3 countries, a family structure in Lagos that had been operational for 15 years, the shell companies, the forged documents, the women in Poland and Romania, the life insurance policy. The journalist had done her work. The photograph ran with the piece. The 3 of us on a video call. Fatima in Dubai, Priya in Toronto, me in London. None of us were looking at the camera. We were looking at each other. I don't remember which moment it was taken from, or who had thought to capture it, but it was the image that ran, and it was the right one. 3 women who had never been meant to find each other, sitting inside the same frame. Emeka was arrested in Cape Town 2 days after publication. Adaize and Chisholm were arrested in Lagos the same week. I read the notifications from my solicitor in short, factual messages. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. Not relief, exactly. Not satisfaction. Something quieter and more complicated. The particular feeling of a thing that has been in motion for a long time finally meeting resistance. Not an ending. A stop. Fatima sent a single message to our group thread. "It's done for now." Priya replied, "For now." I read both messages and didn't add anything. There wasn't anything to add. We all understood what for now meant. The legal process would take months, possibly years. The money that had been taken might not all be recovered. The marriages, whatever they had legally been, would need to be unwound through courts in multiple jurisdictions. There was still a great deal of road ahead. But the structure was visible now. It had a name and a shape, and it was standing in the light. That was what we had been able to do. I drove home from my mother's house that Sunday evening. The house was quiet when I came in. I put my keys on the table. My keys, not his, and stood in the hallway for a moment. The spare keys were gone from the hook by the back door. I had taken them down weeks ago and put them in a drawer. I hadn't noticed until now that the hook was empty. Small things. That's how it goes. The legal proceedings took most of the following year. The forged mortgage was voided. That process took 4 months, 3 solicitors, and more paperwork than I had generated in my entire professional life. The life insurance policy was canceled. The civil recovery, the actual money, the amounts that had been extracted across years and jurisdictions, moved more slowly and returned less. I was told to expect partial recovery at best. I adjusted my expectations and kept going. I went back to work in the January. My colleagues knew. I hadn't told them directly, but the story had run in a national newspaper with my photograph in it, so there was nothing to manage. I had expected pity, the particular careful kindness people extend to someone who has been publicly humiliated. What I got was more complicated than that. People were quieter around me than usual, more detail-oriented. Some of them didn't know what to say and said nothing, which I preferred to the ones who said too much. My manager called me into her office on my second day back. She closed the door and sat across from me and said, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 1, 8, underscore, underscore. I didn't know what to do with it. I said, thank you. I looked at the wall behind her for a moment. I had spent 15 years being competent at my job, and the most visible thing I had ever done with that competence was dismantle my own marriage. I didn't say that. I just said thank you, and went back to my desk and opened my files. I did not grieve him. That surprised me at first. I had expected to miss him. The specific physical presence of him, the sound of him in the house, the particular way the mornings felt when he was there. But the man I had been missing since the phone call was already gone before I had a name for what had happened. By the time I had the name, there was no one left to miss. What I grieved was the marriage. Not him. The marriage. The 7 years of ordinary life that had been entirely real to me, even when they were not what I thought they were. The Sunday mornings. The arguments about small things. The way we had learned each other's habits and worked around them without discussing it. That life had existed. I had lived it. The fact that it was built on something false doesn't make the living of it feel false, and I'm still not sure what to do with that. I had to rethink the miscarriage. I don't have a clean way to say that. I had grieved it once, properly, inside what I believed was a real marriage to a man I knew. I had to grieve it again inside the truth, inside the knowledge of who he actually was, what he was running, what else existed alongside that hospital waiting room. The loss was the same. The context was different. I don't know how to hold both of those things at once. I'm not sure I'm supposed to yet. I cried in a supermarket in March, not over anything significant. I was standing in the cereal aisle and I picked up a box. Something he had liked, something I had bought automatically for 7 years, and I stood there holding it and something gave way. I put the box back on the shelf and stood very still for a moment, and then I went to the car park and sat in my car until it passed. In the moments you prepare for, you're fine. It's the cereal aisle on a Tuesday that gets you. Fatima and I speak every few weeks. Priya less often. She has a newborn, and time is different for her now. We are not friends in the conventional sense. We did not choose each other. We were placed inside the same structure by the same man, and we found each other inside it. And that is a different kind of bond. Closer in some ways than friendship. Harder to explain in others. We don't always have things to say. Sometimes we check in and say very little, and that is enough. Fatima told me her daughter had started asking questions. Not about the case, about her father, in the simple, direct way that 9-year-olds ask things. Fatima said she was answering as honestly as she could, in the amounts a 9-year-old could hold. I didn't know what to say to that. I just said I was sorry, and I meant it. Priya's baby was born in April. A girl. She named her Amara. It means truth. I read that in a message and sat with it for a long time. Pauline came to stay in February and didn't leave until April. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't suggest therapy or timelines or the importance of moving forward. She cooked. Proper food. The kind that takes time. The kind that fills a kitchen with smell and warmth, and the sound of something happening. She watched television in the evenings and let me sit beside her without requiring me to be anything in particular. On the days when I didn't want to talk, she didn't talk. On the days when I did, she listened. She never said I told you so. Not once. Not even close to it. I had been braced for it. Some version of it. Some gentle reminder that she had seen something I hadn't. It never came. She just cooked and watched television and sat in the quiet with me, and that was more than I knew how to ask for. I repainted the kitchen in March. Not because it needed it, because I had chosen the original color with him, and I wanted to choose something alone. I spent a weekend doing it. 2 coats, the trim, the wall behind the door that's always slightly awkward. It took longer than I expected. When it was done, I stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked at it. A different color, the same room, the same light, the same hook by the back door where the spare keys used to hang. I made tea. I sat down. The choice was mine. That was enough. It is a Sunday morning. The kitchen is the color I chose. The coffee is on the counter. Outside, the street is doing what it does on Sunday mornings. Quiet, unhurried, the particular quality of light that only exists before the day has properly started. Pauline will call soon. She always does, on Sundays, around this time. I used to say, I know exactly who I married. I said it with certainty. I said it the way you say something you don't think needs defending because you can't imagine being wrong about it. I said it to my mother, to myself in the small hours when something felt slightly off and I needed to put it back in its place. I was wrong about him. That part is simple. But I've been thinking about what I was actually doing when I said it. I wasn't just describing him. I was describing what I had chosen to see. The version of him I had built from 7 years of ordinary life. From a man who showed up, who was steady, who made me feel like I didn't have to manage everything alone. I believed in that version because he had made it real, carefully, over years. That's not stupidity. I know that now. I am not ashamed of having loved him. I'm not ashamed of the years, or the house, or the life I thought we were building. I'm not ashamed of trust itself, of being a person who extended it, who believed what she was shown, who didn't spend her marriage looking for the exits. I will trust again one day, not the same way. Not without the part of me that will always notice when something feels wrong and will not, this time, explain it away. But I will. He took enough. I'm not willing to let him take that too. The phone rings. I know who it is before I look. I pick it up. Morning, Mum.